bunch of different diets that you can go on. And the biggest thing to understand is that you see a lot of scientists that will just say like, this is the best diet. You should do this. You should do that. Listen, guys, one thing that it's important to understand is that everyone's different. Some people respond better to heavy training, like Paul responds really well to heavy training, okay? I respond better to high rep training. Dieting. So rather than tell you this is the best diet, I'm going to take you briefly through 3 different general dieting protocols, and then plus or minuses, and then you can go ahead and choose which one you want, right? So now, let's face it, we all came off, through Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year, and I don't know about you guys, but like all throughout the Christmas holidays, I'm like, I'm just gonna have one cookie. It's not gonna hurt me, right? And next day, I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna have this brownie. And then, the next day, I'm like, oh, it's only one slice of pie. So then, but you go through Thanksgiving, and then you go through Christmas, and then you go through New Year, and that starts to add up. Now, when you're eating those foods, typically it's high fat and high carb at the same time. Now, the worst combination that you can really go to is high fat and high carb at the same time. So what happens when you manipulate like your diet in general? Okay, if I've been eating high at the same time, can I go on a low fat diet? Will that work? Sure. I mean, yeah, that will work. So a low fat diet can work, and one of the ways it works is you lower your overall calories. So if I've been eating high fat, high carb at the same time, if I lower my fats, I'm gonna lose fat just by virtue of lowering my calories. And lowering your calories is definitely one of the major ways that we can lose fat, okay? Do you have to lower your calories to lose fat? No. Technically, in our studies, we put people on maintenance calories. Their body weight hasn't changed. They gained muscle, lost fat. So they had a body recomp. So first thing you understand is what's your overall goals, okay? If you're kind of like 170 pounds and you're a guy and you're like, I'm not really looking to lose a lot of weight, I just kind of want a body recomp, having a clean, low-fat diet, moderate to high protein, and you train hard, you'll probably have body recomp. But if you're literally just lower your overall calories, fat has 9 calories per gram. So by lowering fat, you're going to by virtue lower a lot of calories. So if you're doing that, the key thing I want you to understand is that you don't want to go too low fat. You go back to the 80s and basically it was like fat was evil, okay? And it was like, I mean, I can remember like when I first started like bodybuilding, everything was low fat. And I would like, if I had like a burger, I would like use this, burn the fat out of it, you know what I mean? But you don't need, the problem with going too low fat is your testosterone levels will plummet. And so you don't want to go below 20% fat and probably below 30%. So keep your fat anywhere from 20 to 30%, even if you're quote low fat, okay? So that can work by virtue of just lowering your overall calories. What are the problems that you can see jumping up when you do that? When you go low fat, you tend to get a lot hungrier, okay? So people will feel hungry all the time, especially if you're lowering your calories. So you need to counter that, right? So how do we counter hunger pains when we're super low fat? Couple different ways. Number one, the carbohydrates that you eat relative to the ratio of protein is very, very important. So my brother, Dr. Gabriel Wilson, and Dr. Lehman's lab did a lot of research on what the optimal ratio is between protein and carbohydrates when you're dieting. And first off, like how many carbs do you need when you're dieting and stuff like that? You really don't need more than 3 to 5 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight, which is going to come out to anywhere from like, anywhere from 1 to 1.5 grams of carbs to 3 grams of carbs per pound of body weight. No more, actually to 2 grams of carbs per pound of body weight. So you're talking about 1 to 2 grams of carbs per pound of body weight is all you really need, like even dieting, right? So again, you take a guy like me, I'm about 175 pounds, right? So, you're not talking about that much. Maybe 200 grams, 175 grams of carbs, 200 grams of carbs. to maybe 300 grams of carbs to fuel my energy. More than that, there's not really a point to lifting weights. If I was doing lots and lots of endurance exercise, an endurance athlete, maybe. So the ratio that you're your carbs to your protein, you don't want your carbs to exceed 1.5 to 1. So like if I had, in other words, like ideally it's more like a 1 to 1, but again, like if I had like 200 grams of carbs, probably my protein is going to be around the same. Otherwise, I'll crash really rapidly. So one way to avoid crashing is to keep your carbs moderate. Secondly, is your protein should also be close to around what your carbohydrates are. Third, someone mentioned it earlier, but basically the type of carbohydrates you select are going to determine how full and satiate you get. So I get flexible dieting, I understand the concept, but if I were to eat really high glycemic carbohydrates, meaning like fast burning carbs all day long, I'm gonna be a lot hungrier, okay? So yes, there is a difference between what's a fast like Rice Krispies? Yep. There's a difference between Rice Krispies and oatmeal. There's a difference between even oatmeal and broccoli. Or cream of rice and green beans. Okay, so the higher the fiber content, the fuller you're gonna stay. And so that's very, very important, okay? So Ryan, I'm actually talking total carbs, but yeah, net carbs in general. But the main thing to understand is that you want your carbs to have a high fiber content. So research kind of basically shows, we say, well, how do we know how much fiber you should have in carbs? Research seems to indicate that you don't want the ratio of total carbs to fiber to exceed 5 to 1. In other words, like if I were to have 20 grams of carbs, you want to have at least 4 to 5 grams of fiber in those carbs. If you don't, you'll crash. Okay? So basically, again, so if I had 30 grams of carbs, probably want at least 6 grams of 5 to 6 grams of fiber in there. Looking at it, I go 30 grams of carbs, 2 grams of fiber, you're going to likely crash and you won't be as full. So that's very, very important to understand that you keep that ratio of carbs to fiber at no greater, shouldn't exceed 5 to 1. If it does, you need to add fiber. So basically, like for example, if I have something like a piece of bread and it's like 10 grams of carbs and only 2 grams of fiber, 10 grams of carbs and only 1 gram of fiber, adding a salad in is going to be good. Okay, so keep that ratio ideal. So those are my tips for that type of diet. Now on the flip side of things, is what the second diet I'm going to talk about is maybe lowering your carbs to maybe 1 gram per pound and making up for it by upping your protein. Okay, this is a diet that Andy's had a lot of success with, and actually Dr. Jose Antonio's lab has shown this. So normally you keep your protein at 1 gram per pound. In this case, you're going to get your protein at 1.5 to 2 grams per pound of body weight. And you're going to lower your carbs. So I think Paul probably does something similar to that. What are your carbs around?
My carbs are like about 180, 190.
Okay, and what's your protein at?
About 210.
210. Okay, so he's actually fairly even. So you're like the first diet I talked about. Mm-hmm. But basically, one diet is having moderate carbs, low carbs, like maybe 1 gram per pound, and then your protein ends up being 1.5 to 2 grams per pound. Okay, so it's much higher. Research shows that could be beneficial in the short term for losing fat. But remember, if you're going crazy on protein, 1.5 to 2 grams per pound, your body adapts to that. And it adapts to the point where once you lower your protein, you could lose muscle. So you don't want to stay on super high protein for too long because your body adapted. So it might be something that you might just do twice a week, 3 times a week, or no more than a few weeks in a row. And then you're going to need to lower that protein because your body will adapt to super high levels of protein. The advantage to having 1.5, 2 grams of protein a couple times a week is protein's very satiating. And it's very thermically active, which means it takes a lot of energy to break it down, and that can expend a lot of calories. So a very high protein diet where, sometimes just like focus on getting high protein, and then you're going to be so full you're not going to eat a lot of anything else. So that's a second dieting strategy you can use. The third dieting strategy is the opposite of kind of what I've been saying, on carbs. Basically, you take your carbs and you minimize them, meaning you lower your carbs % of your diet, and you up your fats to like 70-75% of your diet, and you keep your protein at about 20 to 25% of your diet. That's a ketogenic diet, okay? That can work too. So again, the keys to a ketogenic diet are this: select meats and dairy and add fat. Select meats and dairies that are fattier. So bacon, blue cheese, cheese in general, heavy creams, coconut oil. The key to a ketogenic diet to understand is that you're gonna wanna make sure that you keep fiber in. So a lot of times people think a ketogenic diet is just, I'm eating bacon and burgers all day. But if you don't get fiber, that's not ideal. It's not ideal for gut health. It's not ideal for digestion. So make sure you're having like salads and stuff while you're eating, okay? Quest Keto actually just launched a new keto line, and you know, if you have a hard time eating stuff, I'd recommend that. Okay, so what are the things that you need to look for when you do a ketogenic diet? Number one thing is that transition phase is going to be hard. So when you're transitioning from going not keto to keto, most people quit in the first 2 weeks. So how do we overcome that? One, I mean, to be honest, I recommend exogenous ketones during that phase, because exogenous ketones can lessen that transition. Two, having things like, actually Benny said probiotics, that would be beneficial during a keto diet, especially because fiber tends to lower. Three, you need to salt your foods. When your insulin's low, you excrete sodium at a high rate, so you need to salt your foods. That'll keep your pumps, keep you fuller, but also the major thing it's going to do is going to help you during that transition phase because you're excreting sodium a lot faster. The next thing is things like coconut oil and MCTs can get your ketones up higher and help speed that transition phase. Okay, so that's one thing I recommend definitely on a ketogenic diet. The other thing is be consistent. Track your food. Use things like MyFitnessPal to track your food, because if you don't, you'll go, oh, why do I feel terrible? I thought I was keto. You're tracking your food and your ratios are more like 50% protein, 30% fat, 20% carbs. No wonder you're not in ketosis. Again, over 70% fat, less than 10% carbs, the rest protein, okay? So that's the keto diet. The last diet I'm going to talk about that I think is recommended and can be used on any of these, but particularly ketogenic dieting, is intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is a great way to just lower your calories, and basically it's just time-restricted feeding. And what you end up doing is you're going to skip breakfast and you'll start eating maybe around 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the day, and you stop eating around 9 or 10. So you ate, you know, for anywhere from 9 to 10 hours during a day, and you fasted for 15 to 16 hours, okay? So our dietitian in our lab right now, Andreas, does intermittent fasting. Advantage of the intermittent fasting is even if you were eating carbs, if it's moderate carbs like Paul, you actually get into ketosis around the beginning. And it's a great way to cut calories. Now, things to look out for intermittent fasting: when you first start, you're going to be starving in the beginning of the day. You're going, where's breakfast? Where's breakfast? Oh my God, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. But the thing to understand, it's very, very important to understand, is that that's okay. That's okay, because after a week or two, you're going to adapt. Another type of intermittent fasting strategy is every other day fasting, where you eat a normal diet, the next day you're going to lower your calories like 500 to 1,000. If you're going to do that, it's going to be a protein-sparing modified fast. So on those days, you're basically going to end up just having almost all protein on those days to spare your muscle mass, okay? So that's kind of an overview. Again, one strategy is low-fat dieting. If you're going to do that, make sure your protein's moderate. Don't, make sure your carbs don't exceed like 1 to 2 grams per pound of body weight. Your protein should chase those numbers. To stay satiated, make sure you select low glycemic foods, fibrous foods, lots of salads, okay? Second dieting strategy we talked about was very high protein. So if you're going to do that, you're talking about 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, which is fine. But if you do that for too long, your body will adapt to that too. So maybe just do it a few days a week. Third dieting strategy we talked about is ketogenic dieting: 75% fat, 20% protein, under 10% carbohydrate. Things to watch out: don't lower your fiber. Have a lot of salads with that. The transition phase is going to be the hardest. lots of ketones, exogenous ketones during that phase. Recommend having MCTs during that phase as well. Intermittent fasting is the fourth or fifth dieting strategy we talked about. Basically, you're going to not eat breakfast. You're going to start eating around 12 or 1. You're going to stop eating around 9 or 10. So you're going to fast 15 to 16 hours, and you're essentially eat for 8 or 9. Lots of benefits to that, and you can gain just as much muscle while doing it. If you lower your fasting window to eating window to only 4 hours, you'll likely notice muscle loss. So guys, that is it for the lecture for today. Now I'm going to take your dieting questions on, and I'll rotate between these things. And you can name the person too.
Okay. Bobby Panton. What happens if you eat a bunch of carbs and sugar and then supplement with exogenous ketones? Will your body store the carbs as fat or glycogen?
Great question. Is that Bobby, you said?
Bobby.
Bobby, great question. And I want to follow that up with Michelle's question on cinnamon. So what we're talking about is nutrient partitioning. The big thing we're always interested in is nutrient partitioning. Nutrient partition means where do carbs go? They go to fat or they go to muscle. And in muscle, we think they get stored as glycogen. Okay? Ketones make you more insulin sensitive. And what that means is that you're going to release less insulin per gram of carbohydrate. Okay? Now that's important because less insulin should mean less fat storage. It's theoretical because no one's looked at this really. One thing we have looked in our lab when we gave a small amount of carbs and we gave ketones at the same time. And when we did that, you actually, normally when you eat carbs, you're burning 100% carbs. When you give ketones and carbs, it seems that you don't raise the amount of carbs you're using as high. So theoretically speaking, you wouldn't store as much fat. Now, if you eat a ton of carbs and sugar, you're gonna store fat. I don't care if you take ketones at the same time. You're gonna store fat. But it might lessen the blow. Going to Michelle's point, she talked about cinnamon. And cinnamon is an insulin sensitizing agent. And the thing about cinnamon is it slows the breakdown of carbohydrates in the intestines. And by slowing that, if you had like higher glycemic carbs, they'll act more like lower glycemic carbs. And so you may store less fat with that and may be less hungry. So yeah, cinnamon it would be good to prevent some of that fat gain. Berberine, as Andy said, is also a way. In fact, when studies with high fat, high carb diets, you have less of inflection when you have those types of diet, when you have berberine. And with berberine, 0.5 gram to 1 gram per day.
Okay. Based on studies, you essentially only need protein for muscle protein synthesis. What's the true benefit of using carbs, either for recovery or more endurance and energy?
So basically, the real question is like, do you need carbs to gain muscle? And then what's the other benefit to carbs? No, you don't need carbs to gain muscle, like at all. You don't. So what's the benefits to carbohydrates? Well, depends. Like basically, if I'm doing a low fat diet, then I can't depend on ketones as fuel. In which case, my fuel source is carbohydrates. So really, what they act as is a fueling agent. So the benefit of carbs in that case is to provide fuel, and so. But again, that's where you opt for lower glycemic carbohydrates. So for muscle growth, they're not necessary, but they provide a fuel source. Dominique says, if dieting for a while and slowly adding cardio, more training sessions, and lowering calories, how should I do proper deload? Kilocalories, training frequency, cardio. Okay, here's the thing. Calories interact with what your exercise is, right? So if you deload and you're not training as high a volume, your calories should adapt along that. In other words, you're not going to use many calories on your lower training days, right? So that's the thing. So again, your calories should sort of follow your training regimen, right?
Does that same theory apply when you're doing strength training versus hypertrophy training?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess it all depends on your goals. Now, are you talking about in particular like fueling the workout?
Yes, fueling the workout. With strength training, you're gonna obviously have less volume.
Yeah. Strength training is going to have a lot less volume. So you don't need as many carbs that day, for example. You don't need as many calories. It could be hard training, but you don't need as much fuel for strength training as you do for hypertrophy. It's a really good question.
Very good one. Do
Yeah.
antibiotics significantly, or can they cause inefficient nutrient absorption?
So do antibiotics, can they like impact nutrient absorption? The answer is yes. So gut, the majority of our genes, are in our gut. Okay, so our gut health, our bacteria in our gut control how we think. They control our digestion. You know, how we respond to foods, if we store them or not. And antibiotics kill both good bacteria and bad bacteria. So it's like an all-out war on bacteria. And if you impact your gut bacteria, actually you notice a lot of times when you're taking antibiotics, you have loose stools, you have digestive problems, and those could last for a long time. And so, yes, first off, if you don't have to take antibiotics, in other words, if it's like every time you get sick you take antibiotics, that's a problem. Okay, you might try something different. If you have to take antibiotics, like you're having surgery, for example, take probiotics at the same time. So that would be a recommendation.
Increase fiber.
Let's try to fire off some questions because I know we keep getting a lot. So let's just start asking them and try to answer them as quick as you can.
As quick as possible.
Let's go right there. Start
Rapid
there.
fire. Okay. Your thought on glucose and normal glucose range for dieting? Basically, normal glucose range should be 80 to 120. Don't let it get too much higher than that. If it is, then have lower glycemic carbs.
Next. Boom.
Phosphoric acid, go.
I think it works. 750 milligrams a day before you train. Hypothyroid, do you still recommend ketogenic dieting? It could work if you're in any situation. Which diet would you recommend?
30% body fat, yep.
Probably a lower carbohydrate diet. Whether that's keto or not, I'd recommend a lower carbohydrate diet for that. Okay. Can we slowly progress to a keto diet to avoid those 2 bad weeks? No, the sooner you get in, the better. So I would jump fully in.
Right here.
How would you structure a mini cut and gaining phase? I would do 2 weeks of dieting and 2 weeks of more maintenance, slightly above calories. If I'm doing intermittent fasting, should I or can I add protein to coffee in the morning? No, I don't mind. If it's a modified intermittent fast, maybe BCAAs. But it wouldn't be if you're having like a bunch of protein. When on keto, what is better to complement with lifting to lose fat? High or low intensity? Our study showed high intensity burned out glycogen fast and got you in keto faster. Do we need carbs, or Estes, do we need carbs immediately after the workout? Not if you're training at that same muscle group that same day and you want fuel, yes. If you're not going to hit it again for like 48 hours, no.
Best supplement for fat loss. Best supplements.
Best supplements for fat loss. I like stuff that helps with my satiety, like glucomannan. It's like a fiber. It helps with satiety. That's when implementing caffeine can be good. It keeps your metabolism high. Green tea's really good. HMB is good for sparing muscle. Ketones, I think, are excellent for maintaining focus. Thoughts on mannitol, stevia, erythritol? Love stevia, love erythritol. Mannitol really hurts your stomach. So the last 2 are good. The first one hurts your stomach a lot. BCAAs are way during a workout. I like BCAAs because it's easier in your stomach.
Best time to take ketones
around training. About 30 minutes before. When you're sick, would you recommend stopping 16 to 8 intermittent fasting window? Also, how would you still train? Here's the thing. There's an inverted U. If you're sick, go to maintenance training. Okay, so cut your volume down by 75%. Avoid carbs at final day for the meal if hour before bed. I usually have veggies and egg whites, scrambled egg. That's a fine strategy.
Does vitamin C affect gains? If yes, how to dose
If you
properly?
take vitamin C around your workout, it will hurt your gains, yes.
Supplements add.
Okay. All right. What is better after training, isolate or BCAAs? I like full protein source after I train, so I'm gonna go isolate. Thoughts on gluten's to impact on glute health? I mean,
Gluten's impact on gut health.
oh yeah. I mean, I think if you respond really bad to wheat, it's not good. If you have no problem with it, I don't think it's a big deal.
How do you come off of keto? Same idea is going on.
So what, 3 more questions?
Sure, we'll do 3 more. So that's one of them.
Okay, what's the question? How do you come off keto?
Correct.
You transition to a very high protein diet that's maybe moderate in carb, like 100 to 150 grams of carbs. Once you've adapted that, then I go more like a high, like what Paul's doing, like 150, 200 grams of carbs and equal protein.
Token because he's gifted. But next question.
Cluster dextrin during metabolic workouts.
So
Michelle, yeah, I mean, if your goal's not, I think it's better than normal carbs, yes. Okay. Okay, any updates on hybrid train study? So far, we find that if you do strength and hypertrophy in the same workout, it could be very beneficial. So Wingate sprints are hit prior leg session. Don't do sprints prior to your leg session. You'll be too winded. Save it for after.